Directives are the most powerful AngularJS feature. They allow you to extend HTML to create the foundation for rich and complex web applications in a way that is naturally expressive. AngularJS includes a wide range of built-in directives, and we are going to focus on binding directives in this lecture. Web applications are dynamic. Our views are nothing but presentation of data. So I have my basic example project set up here. The first step we generally follow is to create a module, passing module name and dependencies as arguments. My module has been associated with the whole HTML using ngapp directive. Controller, which is controlling the whole body element using ngController directive. And when controller gets created, it also creates a $scope which contains our application models. So the $scope object created by our app controller here is attached to the whole body element. And the data we have defined on scope is available here on this whole body element. So you can see we already know some of the directives like ngapp, ngController. Now we're going to start our journey of directives with the binding directives first. So we know view is nothing but presentation of our data, and I have already placed some data in my $scope object. Now we have different ways of presenting this data. One way is to use double curlies and write an expression inside these curlies. So say suppose I want to display the total number of contacts in my contacts array, and I can do that by writing contacts.length in double curlies. So you can see I'm combining the string with my double curlies, and whatever we write inside this double curlies is an expression. I mean, it's a JavaScript expression which gets evaluated on my current scope. As I told you before, the current scope for this element is this $scope object, because this div is actually controlled by this controller, and this controller is creating the scope object and attaching it to the body element. So when this expression will get evaluated, it first see the contacts object, and it will look for this object in current scope. It will definitely get it as it's already been created on $scope object. Then it is accessing the length property of contacts array, which will be returned and replaced here inside this curlies. So let's run and see. Cool. So we are getting the number of contacts printed inside my div element. This is great. So you must be thinking you can write any JavaScript expression inside this double curlies, right? But that's not the case. I mean, you can write some expression, but not all of the expression. Say for example, you want to do addition here. So let's refresh and see if it works. Cool. So it works. But if I try to call a function, say math.mean, and I'm going to refresh, there we go. It's not working. Let me open the console, refresh again, no errors. So it's getting failed silently. That means all of the JavaScript doesn't work here. I mean, what's the use of writing all of your JavaScript code here inside this double curlies? I mean, that's the responsibility of controller, right? This binding we did here is called one-way binding. What I mean is, say suppose I add one more object in this contacts array at runtime, this length will be updated automatically. So do you want to see with an example? Let's simulate the one. So I'm going to add a button here, and we will use ngClick directive on this. I think you must be having some idea about this directive now, as we have used it previously. Then I'm going to call a function which I'll define on my $scope object, and inside this function I'll add a new contact object to my contacts array. Now I'm going to refresh the application, click on add contact button. Awesome. As a new contact is getting added, the length of the array is updating. Hence my data binding expression is also getting updated automatically here. You know, sometimes we don't need continuous binding. I mean, if we are sure that we don't need this length to be updated as new items will be added to the contacts collection. So to achieve this one-time binding, you're going to add double colons before the binding expression, and this will make it as one-time binding. Let's see this in action. So I'm going to refresh the application. Now you can see initially the length is 5 because it is getting this value through this binding expression. But now if I add one more object to the collection, you can see the length is not getting updated. So this is called one-time binding, and you can use this feature when you're very sure that you don't need your views to be updated as the data gets updated. This one-time binding expression is not limited to single value, but you can apply it to the collections as well. So when the collection will be updated, the view will not be updated. This one-time binding expression helps in performance as AngularJS don't need to keep track of changes for these properties. One more thing I would like to add, that we are not limited to add one expression here inside this div. So I'm going to add one more expression here, which is going to display the first contact full name from the contacts list. So open the browser, refresh, and there we go. So we can combine multiple expressions here inside our double curlies. Now say suppose this data is coming from the server and server is taking long time to get this data. There is a possibility, as we are not having the data initially, this binding expression are gonna get displayed as there is no data. To overcome this problem, we can use other directive called ngbind, and then accessing the scope data directly inside this directive's value. So I don't need to use double curlies, which will not get displayed if data is not available. Cool. So let's refresh, and there we go. It's working fine. Now there is one problem with using ngbind directive. I mean, I can't specify multiple binding expression here inside this directive's value. So if I copy this expression from here and paste it here, refresh the application, doing so will give me an error. You can see here. So to solve this problem, we have another directive called ngbind template. So I'm going to use it. I'm going to refresh the application now. Awesome. It works. Now one more thing. If you know, double curlies are used by other templating engine like handlebars. In addition, what if I want to show double curlies as a part of sentence, right? So say suppose I write this sentence in my div which contains double curlies, which I want to show as string values. So I'm going to refresh. Did you notice? This and, which I'm thinking as text, is actually getting evaluated in the current scope. And this and property doesn't exist on my current scope. So Angular do not complain about it, as it is considering it will be created later. So to solve this problem, we can use ng non-bindable directive, which will ignore the processing of this div element's expressions. I mean double curlies. So I'm going to refresh for the last time, and now it's showing the double curlies. So this ng non-bindable directive ignores all of the expression where it's applied, as well as all of its children.